Welcome back to video 11 of the Lose Your History to Make History series.
Man, this is an exciting one, and it is dedicated to one of the greatest human beings I've ever met. Dedicated to, literally, I put this guy as one of the top 1% coaches in the entire world. His name is Mark McGillicuddy Kumachek. Hopefully he's not upset that I gave his middle name, but Mark Kumachek, one of the greatest coaches in the world. He really loved our first Weed the Garden video, and I've been promising him for months that we would do a second one. So, in losing your history to make your history, you're gonna have to weed the garden, baby. I just weeded mine yesterday. Now, Kaylee, she comes up every time we do one of these videos. She comes up with a list of questions to ask me that tie into the topic. So, Kaylee, without further ado, let's weed the garden.
What makes a great friend?
What makes a great friend? Something that has definitely been forgotten in this world. A world that is ruled in codependency. Blech. Here's what makes a great friend. Someone who encourages you, who loves you, who listens to you, who's patient with you, but ultimately doesn't accept you for being a putz, but encourages you to be the greatest version of yourself. Kaylee, would you like to know what to do with people who don't do that?
Yes.
You gotta weed the garden.
And what makes a great parent?
Boy, you know, I'm not going to lie and say I've been a perfect parent. That certainly hasn't true, but every day I think, how can I be a better parent? It's really kind of even how this channel even got started. But you parents out there who you're rushing your kid from sport to sport to sport to sport so they can be better than all the other kids, that ain't it, man. That ain't it. You're raising a kid who won't even be able to learn how to relax when they get older. And believe me, I know this for a fact. Remember as a parent to find out what your kids' dreams are so that you can lovingly support them in their dreams. Kaylee comes to me with stuff all the time, like being challenged by her hospital clinicals next week, a few months back, challenges with some professors, and there is always an openness, and it's because for the last, I'd call it 5 or 6 years, I've been asking her what her dreams are. And I always just retort what she brings to me with, well, how can we get this to move you further towards a dream? It's never, you gotta do this or you gotta do that, like she's some sort of idiot, because parents who constantly tell their kids what they have to do, they're basically, their kids interpreting as, I must be an idiot because my parent thinks I can't think for myself. And that does not work. So as a parent, our role is to encourage and love our children to become the greatest versions of themselves. To have them write a mission statement, to learn to live by the philosophy of the greatest version of themselves, to learn how to prioritize, to learn how to think for themselves. I've never told her, this is what you have to think. Everything's an invitation. But parents, are you helping your children to become the greatest versions of themselves? And if not, Kaylee, what do you got to do?
Weed the garden.
Yes. I was hoping she would dance around a little bit on that one, but she's an INFJ. She's much more reserved than the ENFJ dad, but I think ENFJ's in her eventually. But what's the next question?
What makes a great leader?
Wow. I got to take a deep breath here. Deep breath, because I could go off on one of those angry tangents here, for sure. Make no mistake. Lee Iacocca once wrote a book called Where Have All the Great Leaders Gone? I think if Mr. Iacocca were alive today, he wouldn't be changing his mind on that one. And I'll be polite here because that's me multiplying our gifts. But there are very few leaders out there that are actually good leaders. I'd call it single digit. And here's what I'll say. If you cannot lead yourself, and this does not mean being perfect, by the way. No one's saying that. But if you look in the mirror and you can't lead yourself and you can't even see your own toes, you don't need to be leading anybody else. Step away from your role, get yourself right. Leaders, learn to lead yourself before leading others. And secondarily, the greatest leader of all time had no infrastructure, had no corporate structure, had no corporate building, didn't have millions in the bank, and spread the movements to millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions around the world. Okay? We don't need to reinvent the wheel on what that guy did. But leaders, ultimately, if you're micromanaging people, you're pathetic. If you can't lead yourself and you're in a leadership role, it's pathetic. And every day you should be in the trenches with your team, helping them to become the greatest versions of themselves, finding out what their dreams are, helping them overcome their fears, faults, and failures, and loving them through it all. But once again, ultimately, it boils back down into you got to be encouraging people, drawing out the greatest version of one another. And if you don't do that, Kaylee, what do?
Weed the garden.
Yes! You see how I did that to her? Like, that was actually supposed to be my part, and I was supposed to jump around like a maniac, and now I flipped it around to her. So that's exciting. Next one.
What makes a great program?
Okay, and I think what she means by program is like television, books, etc., right?
Yeah.
You know, I always tell parents, would you let your kids play in the sewer? And they go, no, of course, I wouldn't let my kids play in the sewer. And I say, oh no? Why don't you go look at what they're watching on TV? Why don't you go look at what they're watching on YouTube? Why don't you go check their browser history? Because I got a news flash for you, pal. They're playing in the sewer, baby. They're playing in the sewer, and they're playing in a really dirty sewer. So what makes great programs? What make great books? It's things that inspire us and draw out the greatest version of one another. And that's it. And if it doesn't do that, Kaylee, what do you got to do?
Weed the garden.
Come on. All right, let's go to the next one.
What about booze?
You know, in these politicians, when they go on trial a lot, they plead the fifth. But once again, I'll let you answer this one. What did David White once say?
If anyone or anything doesn't make you feel alive, then it is too small for you.
Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. See, I'm showing how coachable I am too, by the way, because, you know, look, if you believe that you needed something that kills brain cells to relax, you've already killed far too many, because that's proof of concept. So once again, what Kaylee said, if it doesn't help bring you alive, you got to ditch it. It's too small for you. You got to weed that garden.
And what about drugs?
Same deal. Same deal. You know, when we have people write their eulogy and write out what it means to be the greatest self and write out the priorities and write out this, no one ever writes, I want to be a drug addict. Have you seen that one yet?
No.
The number one language of the devil, and the number one language the devil will use to reach your kids, is through drifting. And great parents are not forceful with their kids, but they help them understand setting healthy boundaries so there's not drifting. Because any teenager I've worked with, they don't want to drink, they don't want to do drugs, and it's not because I preached at them. I let them discover that for themselves. Don't drift. And if you're doing some drifting, Kaylee, what do you need to do?
Weed the garden. Okay.
Are there any more questions?
What makes a good career?
Yeah. What makes a good career? It's one that draws out the greatest version of you, one that uses your talents, one that aligns with your eulogy, one that aligns with your mission statement. So many problems that exist in this world exist from broken down teenagers who are making lifelong decisions. Think about that. Do you really think some highly depressed, filled with self-doubt, broken teenagers should be making lifelong career decisions?
No way.
It's a recipe for disaster. You know, I work with lots of attorneys and lots of doctors, and not that these aren't great people, but I've asked them how they got into that field, and many of them got into it because they believed it to be prestigious, and they believed it would heal some internal wound they had, and they still hadn't found their happiness. Don't believe me? Ask a few. And I think about this all the time, and I love doctors, and they're great. But have they gotten a rap for having no bedside manner? Ask yourself why that is. Ask yourself why that is. Do something. You're going to trade away a lot of time in your life. Do something that creates happiness, that's aligned with your mission, that's aligned with being the greatest you. And if you're doing all that, you won't even care how much money you make, because you'll be happy all the time. And you'll be making a difference. And nothing is more important than that. And don't rush your kids into making lifelong decisions. That's a really bad program that's going on. And your career should draw out the greatest version of you. When you're done at the end of the day, you should not want to go to Wind Down Wednesday. I went downstairs. I used to live in the city, and there was all these thousands of people gathered on a Wednesday night, and I thought maybe someone famous was around, and I'm very naive, and I walked over and I go, what are all these people gathered around for? And the guy said, oh man, we're here for Wind Down Wednesday. And I said, what do you got to wind down from? He goes, oh, yeah, everybody hates their jobs. I go, oh, wow, I didn't even know this exists. So to be straight here, what you're telling me is you have to wind down from your own poor decisions? And the guy looked at me like I was some sort of a maniac. And I probably could have phrased it a little bit differently, but it is the reality. And I said, hey, sir, great news. Your decisions landed you to where you need to go get drunk to make it through the week. So if you make different decisions, maybe you'll be upstairs with the love of your life next Wednesday night, and you'll be living the career of your dream. And then the guy was like, whoa, man, are you the one they call John D? And I said, perhaps. But if you don't have a career that does that, Kaylee, what do you need to do?
Weed the garden.
Are there any more questions?
I have no more questions.
Once again, if something does not draw out the greatest version of you, weed the garden. Thanks, Mark Kumachek. Love you, my brother. And Kaylee, we don't want them to weed the garden of our channel because it helps them become the greatest version of themselves, right?
Yes.
What do we want them to do instead?
Please hit like, subscribe, and share.
See you next week.